Hi, this is Paul. This morning, Algo served me up a little clip from a conversation between John Papola and Peter Boghossian. You might remember I had a conversation with John Papola just a few months ago, and so yeah, I always debate the value of clips. I don't. They take a little time to make. I don't take a lot of time making them, but they take a little time to make, and I always was like, well, are they worthwhile? But I do value other channels because I didn't even know John Papola talked to Peter Boghossian. Uh, and I don't know if I'd listen to the whole channel because Peter Boghossian mostly just talks about the woke stuff, and we've been hearing that stuff for 7 years. But and Peter, of course, I've heard a lot of Peter's takes on a lot of these things, and I've watched some of his channel and had that talk. I had that little episode with him in at ARC back when I was at ARC. When was that? That was November of 2023. Yeah, I think that's when it was. So, but this section caught my attention. Well, I'll just play it now.
It's 2024, 15 years ago, roughly. On my bus routes into Manhattan every day, I watched a 20-hour symposium called Beyond Belief that I found on the internet. And it was Dawkins and Sam Harris and it was like the leading lights of the new atheist movement in this conference that was filmed. And then I went on a little tear reading all the intelligent design books. So I was having all kinds of fun. So you're saying now that kind of Beyond Belief conference is just critical social justice
All of it,
fest.
yeah. I mean, I haven't looked in the last couple of years, but for sure, I mean, the canary in the coal mine was skepticism, and then it went to atheism. But my point to you is that that's the substitution hypothesis.
Okay, we'll get to the substitution hypothesis. We've talked about that for years, but where this sort of connected up, I've been spending some time on Substack lately. So part of what happens with my holiday schedule is that I have family that's home, and if I have family home, I don't watch as many YouTube videos because I think it's rather annoying for me to sit there and watch a YouTube video all by myself. And so we're often doing things, and so then I'm usually reading. And I've been playing around with the Substack app and thinking about other ways to use Substack. Substack has sort of become the blogosphere, and everybody has a Substack, and of course some of them have some that's free. It's a premium thing. Some you have to pay for. And I just sort of realized kind of the way Substack is acting like Twitter, where people restack things. And so then it's kind of a feed. And so I've been kind of going through the feed, and then other people that I follow restack other people's feeds. And so it sort of reminds me back in the RSS days when I had a pretty complicated, this was actually back when Google Notebook, Google had really a nice RSS reader archiver, and then it abandoned the project, which super annoyed me. So now I have sort of my own system of trying to, when I read things that I think I want to keep, I have a way of keeping them as a PDF so that I can mark them up and keep them, and I'm doing similar things with books. So that's all. It's just sort of part of my process. I've been incorporating probably less video content and more text content into my usual flow of information. And this goes way back before I started doing videos. I was an ardent article. I basically got it from Tim Keller, who basically said, books are long. You really have to read a lot of articles. You can get a lot of stuff from articles that books just tend to take a lot more time to go through. But obviously you got to read both. So I came across, I don't know how I came across it, but hey, look, Sarah Haider has a Substack. Of course she has a Substack. Why wouldn't she have a Substack? And someone else sort of restacked this, and I read it, and I found it interesting. It was very much in combination with what Boghossian was talking about there. And I guess it's created by a new hubbub in the new atheist community. This past week, a drama has been unfolding at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It seems that they published a piece by an intern, Kat Grant, on the definition of woman in their newsletter. Free thought today. Guess it's not quite as free as it used to be. You can read the piece here if you like, but I'll spoil it for you. Grant thinks a woman is whoever claims to be one. Thankfully, they invited the distinguished biologist Jerry Coyne for a rebuttal defending the biological definition, but they hastily took it down, calling it an error in judgment. I love to speak about this kind of stuff. That does not reflect their values. An error in judgment that does not reflect their values. Understandably outraged, Coyne resigned from the Freedom from Religious Honorary Board, as did Richard Dawkins and Steven Pinker. Oh no, we have a church fight. While they were saying goodbye to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, I think it might be a good time for me to say goodbye to organized atheism altogether. And that's what really caught my eye. Because I've been thinking about movement conservatism, partly with the whole hubbub about what's her name? It looks like Ben Shapiro's little sister. Her departure from the Daily Wire. And it's just really interesting how conflict is so much catnip for us. We just love conflict. You know, who cared if Steven Pinker and Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins were on the honorary board? I mean, who's on an honorary board? That's just supposed to give your organization like prestige, even if they're not doing any real work, because they're very busy people who are doing other things. So, and then, you know, with Brett Cooper's departure from Daily Wire, so there's movement conservatism, and it was Ruslan had a thing about Jordan Peterson and the Chosen People, and so that caught my interest. So I clicked on that, but they weren't talking about Jordan Peterson and the Chosen People. They were talking about Brett Cooper, and they're playing this video from Brett Cooper talking at Turning Point USA, which about the only thing I know about that is it's a movement conservatism big event. So then, they were just commenting on the Brett Cooper video, and I thought that was a little interesting. So I thought, I'll go to their YouTube page and see. And then I look at things like, well, we've got Charlie's Best Debates, 10 Unforgettable Moments of Charlie Kirk, 52,000 views. Donald Trump, that should be the biggest one, right? Isn't he the biggest name? I mean, he's the president-elect of the United States, 12,000 views. I guess we're sort of, you know, Donald Trump has sort of mapped territory. Erica Kirk, no idea who she is, 16,000 views. More than the Donald. Wow. Brandon Tatum's Rules for Love, Dating, and Marriage, 4.7 thousand views. Brett Cooper, My Unconventional Upbringing, 162,000 views. You might think, wow, it's the sizzle. It's because she's a young, good-looking girl. Well, Danica Patrick, only 6.4 thousand. Riley Gaines, 7.3 thousand. Riley Gaines has another one. And so I listened to some of Brett Cooper's little talks here.
With all around the world, especially women.
And she, you know, she is she's a very compelling, engaged, energetic speaker. And, you know, I listened to some of it, and she basically talked about, you know, her upbringing and, well, the chaos in her life and how she overcame it. And, well, this isn't intended to be a video on movement conservatism. I certainly have thoughts about that. It seems to grow a little bit. But wow, yeah, just because she either basically figured out that the grass was greener all by her lonesome than rather under the Daily Wire moniker, or she asked for a large amount of money, more than they wanted to pay, and so they brought her maid of honor in to sit. I mean, it's just crazy. It's just people. This is how we are. This isn't about her. Back to Sarah Haider and movement atheism, and I thought, oh, interesting. It is not, to be clear, goodbye to atheism. Despite the reports of famous reconversions of former atheists like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I cannot find God in my heart or even in a God-shaped hole. And so it's so interesting how these spirits moving in the culture, you're hearing more and more high-profile atheists like Alex O'Connor and Sarah Haider sort of wistfully wanting there to be a God and wanting, they just can't find him. Maybe he hasn't found them. The switch has flipped. The myth has fully unraveled and been replaced by an understanding of the world that sits firmly in my mind, far more comfortably than faith ever did. On this point, I don't believe there's a way back for me. I nearly wish I could manage some wiggle room here, if only so that I can understand what it is that my newly religious friends are feeling and accepting, but no such luck. So, for all of Alex O'Connor talking about how unfair it is, he's feeling a little locked out. They had the big Universalist conversation with. They brought in the big guns with Jordan Daniel Wood and over on Grail Country and Luke Thompson, and quite the hubbub. We loves drama. Still, I've become friendly to the idea of religion as a social good as the past few years. We've got the pragmatic religious. And now, more controversially, I even feel that there are intellectual benefits to faith too, or at least to some forms of it. Much of this is informed by my experience working with atheist activism space and by my resulting intellectual drift. They will know we are atheists by our wokeness, I suppose. That's where this is going. As some of you know, I've been involved in movement atheism for much of my career, primarily through my work organizing the rights of ex-Muslims. I ran a nonprofit, producing videos, giving talks, held events. I sometimes wonder if movement anything is mostly a guy thing. And it doesn't mean that women don't do it, but I think just by temperament, guys really like movements like the John Doe Society, and they'll let the girls join their clubs, but guys really like it. Where was I? I also worked with other organizations in the same space, collaborating in various projects through the years and becoming friendly with many kind and thoughtful people. Right from the get-go, however, I felt a tension between myself and this new world. I sensed a staggering homogeneity in thought. So free thinkers. But again, think about sort of what they're selling. And of course, what's interesting here is they're understanding the relationship, let's say, between organized religion and dogma. And this was something that's sort of underneath the Corner's perennial drama around universalism, is people love to be on the same page, and they love to be themselves. And these tensions sort of grab us. And whether it's religion or whether it's almost any kind of thought, people are going to have them. And they're going to have opinions. And they're going to hold them passionately, which means they're going to fight about them. Even the atheists, let's all be together on this. And supposedly, if the world is, we'll get into that when we get into what Boghossian had to say. Everyone had the same social and political views as everyone else. And they didn't even have a church or an authority or a pastor to supposedly tell them what to think. That's always sort of cracked me up when I'd listen to, let's say, people sort of on the Christian moderate left wringing their hands about these churches down in the Bible Belt who are preaching all of these movement conservative values, and I'm thinking, y'all have been in church. You know what it's like. Preacher says what he wants from the pulpit, and at least if there's enough social cohesion and pressure, everybody will be in yes. But when you get them by themselves and you talk to them, there's a lot more cats running around the field than the pastor can seem to herd. I had never experienced this before. My high school buddies, including committed Trotskyites and those who would earnestly argue that the Inquisition wasn't all bad. Even my former religious communities were more heterodox. A few libertarians and old school liberals floated in and out, but otherwise the secular world was progressive through and through. And worse, many of the younger generation were radicals who formed highly intolerant band of progressivism. This was frustrating. I had always understood atheism to be a passive claim. You know, how many times can you hear Sam Harris say, you know, sort of deny movement conservatism? No, we're unorganized atheism. Yeah, but once you have an idea and you think other people are going to be better off with it, doggone it, but you're going to want to make a video and you're going to want to sell that idea. Even if it's universalism or atheism or guess what else? Anything you've heard me sell. A denial of the truth claims of religion and nothing else. The closest thing to a value I had any reason to expect from fellow atheists might be a respect for the tools that led many of us to reject faith, reason and science, and for the freedom of speech and belief that allows us to be open about it. And it is true that given the historical lack of social acceptance of atheists, we've been persecuted. On the right, one might expect that atheists would lean left, that sort of movement conservatism because movement conservatives also sort of wants a certain kind of religion, not so much the religion of Ivan Illich or dread anarchists, let's say. But they just don't lean there. They fell, but they didn't just lean there. They fell in head first. I had ways to ease my discomfort. I could imagine that this was so because atheists were oriented around reality. They were oriented around reality. We have reality, and all those other people are, in the word that you'll hear Peter Boghossian use, delusional. Peter's come a long way, but he hasn't given up the fact that PVK is delusional. When the woke took over, I speculated that this was because atheists were having their compassion hijacked. When it came to Islam, perhaps they were simply misinformed. That sufficed until gender. I've never seen anything like it. In amazement, I watched scores of people I respected add pronouns to their emails, flags to their bios, and repeat circular mantras like trans women are women. The same people who laughed at religious credulity accepted the idea of a gender fully and without question, and worse, they suppressed all open discussion. Overnight, the same people who campaigned against blasphemy laws enacted their own version without a hint of irony. I watched long-standing figures in my movement be cast down for this crime of doubt. First by insane radicals on social media, but as the disease progressed, also by most prominent organizations we had. In other words, it was sort of their prophets were being hung out to dry. I guess Jerusalem is the only place that prophets go to die. Once the organization took hold, and I think this is an overlooked feature, and so this is part of the reason why I think so many people like their religion disorganized. Now, there's a lot of critique you can do with that, but once we get in a group, so say we all, yuck, 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 as the branding on Grim Grizz's channel goes. In other words, movement atheism had betrayed nearly every value it claimed to stand for. Boy, I can hear a lot of Christians make that same. Movement Christianity had betrayed nearly every value it claimed to stand for. Yeah, there's something about movements. And of course, the anarchists can look at Jesus and say, he didn't want to start a church. He just wanted to. Yeah, but you never would have heard of Jesus without the church. All of these tensions, all of these trade-offs, all of these cross pressures. Oh my goodness, what a world we live in. I think of all kinds of generous people that I've met there, including the heads of the Freedom from Religious Foundation, and my heart breaks to see their fall. There are many, I'm sure, who are bowing only because of the pressure to do so is enormous, and I can sympathize with this and wouldn't wish a woke mob on anyone. I myself stayed silent far longer than I should have. But while I have compassion for the bullied, I'm astonished at the zealotry of the believers, who are legion. Most humiliating of all is the fact that atheists appear to be more likely than the religious to hold this particular unscientific dogma, a manifestation of the heightened by the direct contradiction it poses to alleged core values of science and reason. It is because this I now seriously ponder what could I not have imagined myself considering just a few years ago, the intellectual value of faith. I wonder if I have greatly overestimated human reason. In the past, I had thought about the ceiling that faith creates, the ways in which religion hinders progress, scientific achievements, and understanding. But now I think much more about the floor it creates too. Perhaps without certain myths granting the power of the sacred to some fundamental truths, like the fact that there are two sexes, we would drift away from reality altogether. Maybe that is what is happening now. I could not have imagined it could be so wrong. I could not have imagined it could be so. I was wrong. But perhaps it is good to once again be humbled by a misjudgment and to be forced to contend with the occasional contradiction and always fascinating complexity of reality. A good post. Just because I agreed with it. Well, no, it was a good post too. Well, we'll talk about one of the best writers I've read in a little bit. But I thought that was so interesting when I listened to this thing unfold.
A point is the substitution hypothesis is, as belief in Christianity has decreased, is wokeism something that it didn't have to necessarily be wokeism, but did something else have to fill that void?
Now, this is where I bring in, we've been playing on Twitter. We've been playing with thumbnails on Twitter. Oh, by the way, the conference is announced. I should leave a comment in there. So today I just made my plane reservations for Europe, and I'm all signed up for ARC, and I'm gonna fly over, and then I'm gonna zip over to Ireland, and I'm gonna spend some time. We're gonna hopefully have some conversations here. I'm gonna spend some time with Martin Short and Paul Kingsnorth and new friends. Father, like I said, I'm still trying to figure out all these acronyms that you Catholics have. It's a maybe when I go there they'll explain it all to me. I don't know. Marcus put this thing together, and I should really have a better picture. It's not like, well, I have a picture now. Anyway, so if you want to go to this, I am super looking forward to this day. I'm going to be staying with the monks. Are they monks or friars? I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. Maybe when I talked to Connor, I sent Connor a link. I said, because Connor has studied John Calvin and has good things to say about him. So he's still Catholic, unlike what John Calvin did. But hey, to each his own. We've, this disorganized religion thing. But anyway, and Father Paul Murray, I don't know him, but super looking forward to this. Wonderful, wonderful people. And so if you're flying over for ARC, and you can come over a little early and you can get to Ireland, this place is this beautiful old church. It's right on the water on the west coast of Ireland. I'm super pumped about this. Anyway, I got to look for that picture. I must. It's really dangerous if I'm strolling through Twitter while I'm trying to be. This that picture made me chuckle. It was good old Pete at Strange Theology when I was. I sent the picture that I took of Ruslan when I was at ARC last time, because I was giving him grief over the panic thumbnails. And so Ayaan Leitner made this one. He said, congratulations, you get 1 million subs on YouTube with this one. So where was I? I've completely forgotten. I've distracted myself away from the video.
And if so, then shouldn't we nudge people toward more benign forms of delusion? Some guy wrote.
Oh yeah, we're talking about thumbnails, and that went to the thumbnail picture, but I've got to go all the way back to one of the thumbnails and titles I was most proud of, even though I got a little YouTube thing underneath it. Yeah, this was it. Atheism is aids to the secular public square. YouTube didn't like it, but that was a title. I even got Nathan Jacobs up there, and this guy. I got Peter Boghossian. I got that's a great thumbnail. Me looking all weird. I know this thumbnail will sell, but oops. But this is a great thumbnail, and I like this thumbnail. This atheism is aids to the secular public square. That is one of the best titles of the year. If I had to rank titles and thumbnails of my video from 2024, this one wins a prize, just in my own book, because I'm the only one handing out prizes to my thumbnails. Anyway, back to Peter.
Rose from a tomb or build that void? And if so, then shouldn't we nudge people toward more benign forms of delusion? Some guy rose from a tomb, and he did that for your salvation, and he loves you, and he's watching you, and he cares about you. Wouldn't that be better?
Now, just to notice, New Atheism again, they pretty much just see God number 2. That's all the God number 2 stuff. Not much God number 1.
Than teaching people that the whole system is oppressive and racist and needs to be ripped to the ground. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously.
What's your answer?
So I'm not making the moral argument that we ought to nudge people into delusion, but I am saying that it clearly is true that certain forms of delusion are more harmful than others.
Do you feel like that substitution is not just not that we just have one example, but that does where do you stand on the belief spectrum here of that? Like, do you think that that's right?
Yeah, I asked Richard about that, and he said he doesn't think it's true because, well, he hopes it isn't, and he doesn't think it is. He said if it's true, his whole life's work can be thrown out. So I don't know whether or not the substitution hypothesis is true. I mean, if you look at, Phil Zuckerman has some interesting work on this. If you look at the rates of belief in Scandinavia, for example, they're very small, God beliefs. Not many, almost, all the churches and cathedrals, et cetera, have been abandoned. But they believe in other things. Like Iceland, they believe in fairies and gnomes and pixies and garden sprites and all that stuff. So I don't know if the substitution hypothesis is true or not. But the question is, does that cause me to reflect on my work within atheism? The answer to that would be yes and no. Clearly, wokeism has been an unmitigated catastrophe for society at multiple levels, divisive, toxic. I don't know if I'd say ruinous because the jury's still out on that. So it both has and has not caused me to do that. I think that what's most important to think about is what is true. And I would not nudge people toward more benign delusions, but what I would do is I would be more likely to question people and ask them if I thought their beliefs were more detrimental or dangerous or harmful to themselves or society.
What's interesting there is, let's go. Let's have Peter on the screen while I talk about him. Again, it's so interesting that there's a mirroring that happens here because, okay, so harm, we're sort of back to harm as the standard because, well, is it true that people are going to be deluded? And you go back to the Schellenberger thing that I used for that one video with Shermer too, because this is something what they're all dealing with, and Schellenberger basically says, well, I don't think most people can be atheists, or at least they can do it well. If they're atheists, they're going to become harmful. But in some ways, this throws the whole project of being, see, the thing is, if I say truther, that means a whole different thing, right, Grizz? But that's sort of what they are, because they said, well, it's the truth thing, but again, when you get really pressed, their whole business about truth is it was sort of taken down like 100 years ago. So that's where I'm going to bring in Spencer's book. So Spencer sent me his book. I've talked about this book. And not only is the audiobook just beautiful, because Spencer has a beautiful voice, but Spencer can write. This I'm just finishing. I'm just going to end. Does this book have a table of contents? What's wrong with a table of contents, publishers? Just a table of contents instead of, because it would help someone like me. Let's see. So chapter 8, I'm just finishing up chapter 8. No, no. So I'm finishing up part 2. And, well, see, like I said about the PDFs and the reading, let's get into this. So I'm finishing up part 2, and then we're going to be in part 3. There we go, part 3, all things that were made. A bunch of Owen Barfield quotes in here, which is fun. And so some of you will really like that. One of the things that Spencer does really beautifully is he sort of walks through the history of science, particularly of physics, with respect to this question of knowability. Because again, if you listen to Peter Boghossian and many who sound like him, the world is just full of these little Amazon boxes. And we just look at the Amazon boxes, and people are sort of like my buddy Goliath here. Now, if you listen to my sermons, which I'm sure many of the atheists don't, except T-Grog. T-Grog listens to my sermons very faithfully, so we very much appreciate that, T-Grog. Years ago, when my mother-in-law was living in Florida, as any sane people on the East Coast winter, my kids were little, and they're like, well, let's take them to a gator farm. So we went to a gator farm, and we're walking around this gator farm and this little tour, and they have here in Palmdale, Florida, they've got a big old gator named Goliath. People seem to enjoy the rat story in the last video, so we got an animal story in this one. Instead of rats this time, we got a gator. Big old gator named Goliath, and obviously they named him Goliath when he was big. He's a big old gator, and he had this just basically his own little swimming pool out there in the sun. And there he sat in his little swimming pool in the sun, and so everyone's oohing and eyeing over the size of Goliath, and the little handler standing there, someone probably 20, 30 years younger than me. And so I asked him, I said, he just stays there? And the guy's like, yeah, these are simple creatures. We just get him some old chicken and throw him chicken, and he eats the chicken, and he just stays there. And as long as he's got chicken to eat, and I'm sure, maybe some lady gators from time to time, who knows, or something to chase. But who wants to chase anything? He's got a meaning crisis, and he don't mind. That could be a good title for this video. Better yet, he's got a meaning crisis, and he feels fine. Just riffing off some old songs. And as long as you give people all their little Amazon boxes and give them their food and their sex and their amusements and their distractions, they'll be fine. And there's a lot of truth to that. I think part of the reason that the West, and of course this was the great complaint from the Marxists, that if only those Western people weren't so happy and satisfied with their food and their music and their amusements and all of those things, then they would revolt. And the future would come. And, so they turned the screws on their own people, and eventually they did revolt, but it wasn't what they were looking for. So what Spencer really does well is just sort of walks through physics, and he just sort of walks through all the way from the ancient world all the way into the modern world. And one of the big issues that they're dealing with is, I'll bring up another book. This book that Vervaeke keeps pushing. It's a really good book. I'm not through it yet by any means, but it's what I've gotten into so far. And there's an audio version of this. It's really good because this book really helped me sort of understand a little bit better the relationship between the map and the territory. And that as good as we get with our math, there's always that bridge between the map and the territory. And this book talks about it quite well, and how the laboratory and all these facts. And I really loved Rupert Sheldrake's comment years ago when he heard him say, if the constants were so constant, why do we need an office that manages the constants? Well, they're sort of constant. That speed of light fluctuates a little bit, but not so much that any of you need to worry about it. And basically what all this gets down to is the fact that reality is just not what we expected. And so we've sort of used math as a telescope to see beyond what we could see, trusting that the math would get it all right. And then even the math betrayed us. Let's see if I can find the parts I want to read. All this frustrated the most basic intuitions of scientists and laymen alike. If anything was obviously true of physical objects, it was that they traveled from one point to another across an unbroken line of motion, touching every point along the way. They did so whether or not anyone was watching. It's sort of like object permanence, that if I remember being on my junior high playground and I was playing basketball, and it was just one big blacktop area a few blocks from my house there in Prospect Park, where most of the Dutch CRCers had abandoned by that point. But I was playing basketball, and a soccer ball comes out of nowhere, not in my line of sight, and just smacks me in the head. Now, I believe that soccer ball traveled from that one kid's foot all the way across the field and smacked me in the head quite accidentally, because that little junior high kid could not have had anywhere near that kind of accuracy. But that's how things go. And what the physicists were discovering is that these atomic particles were popping in and out, and they can only sort of calculate the probability of their location. And this was towards the beginning of the 20th century. They were getting super frustrated about this. They did so whether or not anyone was watching, and they were not supposed to change rules when mankind's back is turned. Yet here at the most basic level, particles seem to jump from one place from place to place, or even hover in a range of various possible locations. It's really interesting in C.S. Lewis's Miracles, which he wrote in the 30s and 40s. We're just starting to get into this, and so C.S. Lewis sort of points to it, but he didn't know enough of this, and it wasn't clear enough that he really wanted to lean much on it. But Spencer's leaning in. The picture of the world became pixelated, and this is where Spencer really does an amazing job. What a great word for that, became pixelated. Chunked up into tiny regions of mystery where nothing could be nailed down. Planck's constant set an impenetrable barrier around the smallest areas of space. Now again, if you're sort of lost here, just read the book. It's really lovely how Spencer just sort of walks through this with really beautiful and vivid illustrations that sort of help you visualize what can't be visualized. And we'll get to that in a minute. In those forbidden realms, the particles that had once seemed like solid objects scrambled every natural idea of the physical world, moving and changing in ways the mind simply could not envision. Beyond a certain limit, everything went dark. According to Bohr, this was entirely to be expected. His exclamation was devastating in its simplicity. What can never be seen can never be visualized. And when Spencer read that in my audiobook when I was driving back from the airport this morning after bringing yet another one of my children to the airport, it's just like bang. And then suddenly, Grail Country talking about universalism. I had to give Chemo a little time. He was listening to that and asked me questions about it, and I was giving him some of the thoughts that I have about topics like that. At some point I got to put it into video when I get back to the Heidelberg Catechism. What can never be seen can never be visualized. The unobserved behavior of particles can, of course, never be described in terms of human observation. No eye has seen, no ear has heard. And this is part of the problem, that the world as we observe it. This is sort of the whole point of the death of facts, or the epistemic revolution that is currently underway. The world just isn't what it seems to be, and yet it is. And that's sort of where we're stuck. Concepts like location and motion are not, in the end, purely numerical facts, independent of human experience. They are descriptions of how humans can perceive and measure the outside world. Particles exist outside of us, but all the terms we use to describe them, even the mathematical ones, refer to our experience of them. Quietly but doggedly, Bohr insisted on stripping down particle physics to a description of how the outside world was likely to affect human observers. However far the phenomena transcend the scope of classical physical explanation, the account of all evidence must be expressed in classical terms, he argued. Heisenberg's mathematics, Schrödinger's probability waves, Einstein's photons, and Bohr's own electron orbits were all impossible to picture because what they described could never be experienced. The outside world was real, and facts about it could be known, but they would always be known through observation and measurement filtered through the shapes and forms of our conscious mind. And you can see there, or maybe you can't, why we are where we are right now in terms of John Vervaeke's transjection, Jonathan Pageau's naming. It's the return of the observer, because observation reached its limit, but certain people didn't like that, so they just kept sticking to it. But what they're learning from all their friends is that the physicists were right. And the world is not full of Amazon boxes we call facts. And atomic particles, which are an oxymoron, and again, Spencer sort of shows that nicely, they don't act like soccer balls on the playground. Of course, we knew that theoretically, but what Bohr has to say should sort of give us pause and really give us a little bit of humility. And so, delusions, huh? And I think the delusion is sort of the reduction of the world to that which can be observed. Recognizing that all of our descriptions fall short. And even the end of mathematics, and when I mean the end, I don't mean that math is ending. And now I sort of had a little bit of understanding of all of the crying and despairing and got to get off this rockness of someone like Eric Weinstein, who says physics has been stuck for too long. Yeah, well, that's kind of the way things go, of course. Kuhn wrote about that in the History of Scientific Revolutions. Things get stuck and then they get unstuck. And it isn't just about sort of theory, because all the stuckness and unstuckness comes through us meaty, weird people with imaginations and things. And so the fact that only a few of Michael Schellenberger? Only a few of Schellenberger's people can actually maintain being good atheists. Just sort of shows that we are very strange creatures. And I applaud these atheists for speaking their truth and even sticking to their guns. Because the truth is, if nobody sticks to their guns, we don't at least have enough drama to enjoy and dislodge each other from all of the craziness that we have. So, yeah. But Goliath we are not. And Dostoevsky was pretty right about us. And I'd say Augustine too, because our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. All right, maybe that's good enough for now. I don't know if it's made any sense. This is a pretty messy one. But I'll have fun with the thumbnail.